Chapter 3. Sunday late afternoon. Back at her place, Mac drove up as she stood on the front step. Corporal Mac Moreau, the most interesting man in town and the most infuriating. He followed the legal line, even when she wanted him to bend it just an itsy-bitsy bit. Still, she had to admire him for that stance. He did know right from wrong, and that was more than her devious ex had understood. As Mac walked toward her house, he lifted the small bag he carried. "Did you bring everything we need? Because I'm starving." "You're always starving," he said, striding forward to the kitchen. "I'll get started. You can make coffee." Obligingly, she was happy to do that, as she finally had confidence in her ability to make a good cup of coffee. As she watched Mac, he first washed his hands, and then he took the cold pasta from the fridge. "What's in the bag?" "Artichokes," he said with a smirk. "As ordered." She gasped in delight and watched as he popped the top off the jar and pulled out 4 of the oddest-looking things she'd ever seen. Her smile fell away. "I don't know what those are." He stopped, looked at her in surprise. "Artichokes." She shook her head. "I'm not sure if we're talking about the same thing here," she said delicately. "Because the artichokes I know look like a pine cone." He chuckled. "Absolutely, whole artichokes do look like that. These are artichoke hearts." He said, "Surely they didn't put the artichoke leaves into your pasta." She frowned and said, "I don't know." "What do the leaves look like?" "Pine cone petals," he said bluntly. "Could you eat them? Or did you scrape them through your teeth?" She shook her head. "No, I ate them as part of the dish." "Then what they gave you were the artichoke hearts." "Oh," she said, and then in a small voice she asked, "Why do pine cones have hearts?" He looked at her, and she watched his mouth work as he tried to hold back his mirth. She glared at him, her hands on her hips, and warned, "Don't you dare." But it was too much. He sagged into the nearby chair, his arms wrapped on his chest, and then, like a balloon that had been blown up too tight, he howled with laughter. She stomped toward him and swung her arm back, but he leveled a look at her and said, "Don't you even think about it." She snorted and stepped back and said, "How did you know?" When he saw the glass of water in her hand, he just stared at it. "You wouldn't really have dumped that on me, would you?" She just watched him with the same level look, and he chuckled again. "I don't know if pine cones have hearts or not." "Artichokes do," he said. "Next time, if I think about it, I will bring a whole artichoke and we will dissect it." "Okay," she said, happy with that. "You'd have made a good teacher, you know that." "It was my second career choice," he said, "so thank you." The public school system lost out when you went into the legal side of things. "Let's hope I've caused more damage to the criminal world," he said, "than I would have caused to those young vulnerable minds." She thought she knew what he meant but wouldn't worry about it. Because all of a sudden, she saw a piece of artichoke that looked almost like what she was used to. She picked it up and delicately put it between her lips, tasting it. And then she beamed. "Oh my goodness, this is it." And she ate the whole thing. He cut several more and moved them off to the side. She picked up one that had more leaves than the soft heart part. She asked, "Can you eat all of this?" He nodded. But she could see which part was the soft heart and which was the start of the inside leaves. She ate that one too, and after it was all gone she said happily, "That's divine." "Can't say I've had much of them myself to know," he said, popping one into his mouth, but he nodded. "So let's start with the pasta." He pointed at the leftover spaghetti noodles. "Now we can leave them whole." "I don't think so," she said. "They're stiff and cold and will be impossible to eat like this." She shook her head. "That's not the way the chefs made their pasta salad." Mac grabbed a bowl, poured some olive oil in, and rubbed the noodles and the oil together with his hands. Almost instantly they separated into nice, wobbly noodles. "Now," he said, "you can chop them or you can use scissors." "Ah," she cried out, "I have the perfect tool." And she reached into one of the kitchen drawers and pulled out a large pair of shears. He looked at her in surprise and she said, "Hold up the noodles." So he held up one clump of pasta lengthwise, his fists holding opposite ends, and she snipped the pasta in between his hands so that the noodles were now in thirds. He nodded and said, "That works perfectly." With the cut noodles in another bowl, he added Italian dressing. She watched in amazement as he then added a splotch of mustard. When he had it all mixed up together, she delicately dabbed the end of her baby finger into the salad and tasted it. She beamed. "How can you just do that?" He chuckled. "Lots of trial and error." "Maybe lots of trial," she said, "but I highly doubt there was much error." "You'd be surprised," he said. With enough noodles cut for the two of them for dinner, he tossed the artichokes in on top, brought out 3 Roma tomatoes, cut them into bite-sized pieces and added them. He opened a can of black olives, drained it, then added half the can while Doreen watched in fascination as a meal so similar to what she used to love was created in front of her. When he brought out the feta and she saw a solid block, she cried out in surprise. He looked over at her. "And how does your feta normally come?" "In perfect little squares," she said, frowning. "But that one is huge." He nodded. "Do you have a flipper?" She brought him a metal spatula. He looked at it and said, "Perfect." He cut a slice off the block, then cut that piece into small cubes. She smiled with delight. "You know what? If I had any idea that this is all the chefs at my husband's place used to do," she said, "then we were paying them way too much." Mac gave a shout of laughter at that. "I don't know about that," he said, "because they were obviously very good at what they did, or your husband wouldn't have kept them around." "True enough, but he went through one every 6 months or so," she said. "He really was fussy." "I'm not surprised," he said, but he kept it to that. Then she already knew his opinion of her ex. She wondered about bringing up Mac's brother, who'd offered to look into the mismanagement of her divorce case by her own divorce lawyer, then decided against it. She didn't want to ruin a lovely dinner. He tossed the ingredients lightly and said, "Anything else you want in here?" "Pine nuts," she said. He looked over at her and said, "I didn't buy any." "You didn't mention those before." "Oh," she said and then shrugged. "Looks good to me." "Let me check the fridge," he said. He headed there, opened the door and spied the green onions. Perfect. He brought one out, diced it into very small rings and tossed it on top. "Now how about some plates?" "I found these in the back of a drawer last week," she said, coming out with 2 brightly colored, almost garishly colored bowls in orange and red. "I wasn't sure what they were supposed to be, but I thought maybe they would be easier for something like this." He chuckled. "Those are pasta bowls." She looked at him in amazement and said, "But why? Why are they?" "It was a phase," he said. "Everybody had them. We would toss the pasta in a larger bowl and serve it in these." She nodded with understanding. "Yes, that makes sense. We used silver chafing dishes at every dinner." That raised an eyebrow, but he didn't say anything else after that. He served up their pasta salad and handed her one of the 2 bowls. "Where would you like to sit?" She glanced at the kitchen table and back to him. He motioned outside on the deck. "It's a beautiful day. Why don't we sit out there?"